A single gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Placerville, California. As the autumn sun of 1868 sank behind the jagged Sierra Nevada mountains, casting long shadows across the small mining town that had seen better days since the gold rush fever had subsided. The shot wasn't unusual in this wild frontier town, but it sent Alina Mitchell scurrying into the darkness of her bedroom, hands trembling as she pushed a heavy oak dresser against the door. "He's going to kill me this time," she whispered, one hand instinctively moving to protect the small swell of her 4-month pregnancy. At 22, Alina never imagined she would be trapped in a marriage to a man whose gentle courtship had transformed into brutal dominance once the wedding vows were spoken. Victor Blackwell had been charming when he'd arrived in Placerville a year ago, bringing with him wealth from mysterious Eastern business dealings and promises of security that had swayed Alina's financially desperate father. Her mother, dead from consumption 3 winters past, wasn't there to see the coldness behind Victor's smile or warn her daughter against the hastily arranged marriage. Lena winced as heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs of their 2-story Victorian home on the outskirts of town. Victor had built the house as a wedding gift, its grandeur a sharp contrast to the simple wooden structures that populated most of Placerville. What had once seemed like a palace now felt like a prison. "Alina," Victor's voice boomed through the house. "Open this door immediately." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she backed away from the door. "Please, Victor, I just need time to think." "Think about what? About how you've been sneaking letters to that doctor. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Alina closed her eyes, cursing herself for her carelessness. Dr. Williams was the only person who knew about the bruises, the only one who had quietly suggested she might seek refuge elsewhere. The letter had been desperate, asking for help to leave town before the baby came. The wood of the door splintered under Victor's shoulder, and Alina knew the dresser wouldn't hold for long. She looked frantically around the room for an escape, but the windows were too high up for her to safely jump in her condition. "When I get in there," the threat was left hanging as Victor rammed the door again. With surprising strength born of desperation, Alina grabbed her small travel bag from beneath the bed, already packed with essentials she had been slowly gathering over weeks. She had hoped to have more time, to escape when Victor was away on one of his business trips. Now, her only option was the narrow servant's staircase that led to the attic, a temporary hiding place at best. As the dresser began to slide across the floor with each of Victor's impacts, Alina slipped through the small door near the wash basin and hurried up the tight spiral staircase. The steps creaked beneath her, and she prayed Victor wouldn't hear over his own rage-filled shouts. The attic was dark and musty, filled with trunks and furniture Victor had purchased but never used. Alina navigated through the maze by the thin streams of moonlight filtering through the small round window at the far end. She heard the crash of the bedroom door finally giving way and Victor's furious curse when he discovered she wasn't there. "Alina." His voice carried up the stairwell. "This is foolishness. Where do you think you can go? No one in this town will help you against me." Alina shrank back into the shadows, hiding behind a large steamer trunk as she heard him moving around the bedroom below. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't think to check the servant's stairs. After what seemed like an eternity, she heard him storm out of the bedroom, and his footsteps receded down the main staircase. For the first time in hours, Alina exhaled fully. She moved carefully toward the round window, hoping to gauge if she could somehow signal for help. The window was small but looked out over the back of the property where a large oak tree grew close to the house. In the moonlight, she could see Victor's figure marching toward the stables. He was likely preparing to search for her in town, assuming she had somehow escaped the house. Alina knew she had little time. Victor had friends, or at least men, indebted to him throughout Placerville. Once he raised the alarm that his fragile, emotionally disturbed wife had run off, no one would question him. They would only help return her to his care. The night grew colder as Alina huddled in the attic, the thin shawl she had grabbed providing little warmth against the autumn chill that seeped through the poorly insulated walls. She listened intently for Victor's return, jumping at every creak of the settling house. When she finally heard the front door slam and his heavy footsteps move through the first floor, she knew her temporary reprieve was over. "I've sent men to watch the stage office and the train station," Victor called out, his voice eerily calm now. "You can't leave Placerville, Alina. You might as well come out now." Alina pressed her hands against her mouth to stifle a sob. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she gently rubbed her swollen abdomen. "I'll protect you," she whispered to her unborn child. Somehow, the night passed in terrifying slowness. Victor moved through the house methodically, searching rooms and occasionally calling out to her with alternating threats and false promises of forgiveness. Alina remained frozen in place, afraid that the slightest movement would creak the floorboards and give away her position. By dawn, her legs were cramped, her back ached, and her mouth was parched with thirst, but Victor had finally fallen silent. Carefully, she crept to the small attic window again and saw Victor's horse still in the front yard. He hadn't left. He was simply waiting her out. Alina knew she couldn't remain in the attic indefinitely. She needed water, food, and eventually, a way out of Placerville. As the morning light strengthened, she examined the attic more carefully. It was larger than she had realized in the darkness, extending over the entire second floor of the house. At the far end, partially obscured by old furniture, was another small window that faced toward town rather than the back property. Alina made her way through the dusty maze, wincing as her skirts caught on protruding nails and rough wooden beams. The second window was filthy but intact, and when she wiped away years of grime with her shawl, she could see the main road that led into Placerville about half a mile away. If only there was a way to signal someone who wasn't loyal to Victor. The sound of a door slamming downstairs made her jump. Victor's voice carried up to her, though not directed at her this time. She couldn't have gone far. Expand the search into the hills and check with her father again. The old fool might be hiding her. Alina's heart sank. Her father, weak-willed and in debt to Victor, would never stand up to him. If anything, he would help Victor find her, believing he was doing what was best for his daughter by returning her to her wealthy husband. She heard multiple voices respond to Victor, though she couldn't make out the words. Then the front door opened and closed several times, followed by the sound of horses riding away. Victor was organizing a proper search now. Time was running out. Alina sank down onto a dusty trunk, fighting against hopelessness. Her hands trembled as she opened her small bag, taking inventory of her meager resources. A change of clothes, her mother's locket containing a small portrait, $37 saved in secret over months, and a small knife she had taken from the kitchen weeks ago for protection. Not nearly enough to start a new life, but it would have to do if she could escape. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, and Alina winced. "I know, little one," she whispered. "We need to find a way out." As the sun climbed higher, the attic became stifling. Dust motes danced in the beams of light streaming through the small windows, and Alina found herself growing dizzy with thirst. She had to risk finding water soon or she would collapse. She crept to the top of the servants' staircase and listened intently. The house below was silent. Had Victor left with the search party? Or was he waiting, knowing she would eventually have to come out? Just as she was gathering courage to descend the stairs, she heard the front door open again. But instead of Victor's heavy tread, these footsteps were different, lighter, yet purposeful. "Mr. Blackwell." An unfamiliar male voice called out. "Your message said it was urgent." Alina froze. Another of Victor's allies, no doubt. She retreated from the staircase, but in her haste, she knocked over a small wooden box. It clattered loudly on the attic floor, sending up a cloud of dust that made her cough involuntarily. The footsteps below stopped. "Hello, is someone there?" Alina held her breath, but another cough forced its way out, betraying her position. "Upstairs." The man called, and she heard him begin to climb the main staircase. In desperation, Alina moved to the window facing town and tried to force it open. Years of disuse had sealed it shut, and her weakened state made it impossible to budge. With no other option, she grabbed an old brass candlestick from atop a nearby trunk and prepared to defend herself. The footsteps moved through the second floor, checking rooms systematically. Finally, they paused outside the servants' staircase. "Is someone up there?" the voice called, gentler now. "Are you hurt?" Alina remained silent, the candlestick gripped tightly in her trembling hands. "My name is Henry Blackwood," the man continued. "I'm the new deputy in town. Mr. Blackwell sent a message asking for help finding his wife, but he's not here now. If you're Mrs. Blackwell, I'd like to make sure you're all right. A deputy." Alina's heart sank further. Law enforcement in Placerville was notoriously corruptible, and Victor had likely bought this man's loyalty already. Still, something in his voice sounded sincere. "I'm not coming down," she finally called, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Please just leave." There was a pause. "Madam, are you in some kind of trouble?" Alina laughed bitterly. "My husband will tell you I'm emotionally disturbed, that I'm a danger to myself and my unborn child. He'll sound very concerned." Another pause, longer this time. "And what would you tell me?" The unexpected question caught Alina off guard. Most men simply took Victor at his word. "I would tell you that I'm trying to stay alive," she answered truthfully, her voice breaking. "For my baby's sake." The floorboard creaked as the deputy shifted his weight. "Is there a way up to where you are?" Alina hesitated. "The servant stairs, but I'm not opening the door." "That's fair enough," he replied. "May I come up partway, just so we don't have to shout?" Alina considered her options, which were few. The deputy would find the stairs with or without her permission, and refusing might only make him suspicious or hostile. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but not all the way up." She heard him locate the small door and begin climbing the narrow staircase. The steps groaned under his weight. "Stop there," Alina commanded when she could see the top of a brown Stetson hat. "That's far enough." The hat tilted up, revealing a face younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with clear blue eyes that regarded her without immediate judgment. His features were sun-weathered but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard that was a shade darker than his light brown hair. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said with a slight nod. "You look like you could use some water. I have a canteen if you'd let me bring it up." Alina realized she was still holding the candlestick like a weapon and lowered it slightly, though not completely. "How do I know Victor didn't send you to find me?" "He did send for me," the deputy admitted. "But he's not here now, and I'm getting the sense there's more to this situation than a confused pregnant woman wandering off, which is what he claimed." Alina studied him, trying to determine if this was a trick. Deputy Blackwood kept his hands visible on the railing, making no move to come further up the stairs without permission. "I haven't eaten or had water since yesterday," she finally said. "If you have something, I would be grateful." He nodded and slowly produced a canteen from his belt, holding it out to her. Alina approached cautiously, ready to retreat if he made any sudden moves, but the deputy remained still, allowing her to take the canteen without their hands touching. The water was slightly warm but clean, and Alina had to force herself to drink slowly rather than gulping it down. "Thank you," she said, returning the canteen half empty. "I have some jerky too," he offered, pulling a small paper-wrapped package from his pocket. "It's not much, but it's something." Alina accepted the food with the same caution. As she chewed the tough, dried meat, she noticed the deputy observing the attic and then her, his eyes lingering on the visible bruise on her wrist where her sleeve had pulled back. "How long have you been up here?" he asked quietly. "Since last night, Victor." She hesitated, unused to anyone actually listening to her. "We had an argument. He found a letter I had written to Dr. Williams asking for help." Deputy Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Help with what exactly?" Alina unconsciously touched her stomach. "Getting away, before the baby comes." "I see." He shifted his weight, causing the stair to creak again. "And the bruises, did your husband give them to you?" The direct question startled her. No one in Placerville had ever asked so plainly, not even Dr. Williams, who had only hinted and suggested. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible, "among other things." The deputy nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Mrs. Blackwell, Alina," she interrupted. "Please, I never wanted his name." "Alina," he corrected himself. "My name is Henry, and I think we need to get you out of this attic and somewhere safe before your husband returns." She stiffened. "You don't understand. There's nowhere in Placerville that's safe for me. Victor has connections everywhere. The mayor owes him money. The sheriff plays cards with him every Thursday. My own father handed me to him like a business transaction." Henry's expression darkened. "Not everyone in this town is under his thumb. I've only been deputy for 2 months, but I've heard whispers about Blackwell. Nothing concrete until now." "Whispers won't protect me from him," Alina said bitterly. "No, but I will," Henry replied with quiet determination. "There's a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. It belongs to my sister and her husband. Victor Blackwell has no connections there, and it would be the last place he'd think to look for you." Hope fluttered in Alina's chest, but she quickly suppressed it. Hope had betrayed her too many times. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Henry met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've seen what men like your husband are capable of. My mother." He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "No woman deserves to live in fear, especially not one expecting a child." For the first time in months, Alina felt a tiny spark of possibility, but practicality quickly reasserted itself. Victor has men watching the roads, the stage office, everywhere. How would we even leave town without being seen? Henry smiled slightly. "I know a few back trails." "And no one questions a deputy riding out on official business." He gestured to the attic around them. "But we need to move soon. This isn't a place for you to stay any longer." Alina hesitated, her survival instincts battling with desperate need. Finally, she nodded. "All right." "But if this is a trick—" "It's not," Henry assured her. "I give you my word." Something in his steady gaze made Alina believe him, despite all her hard-learned caution. "I need to gather my things." As Alina collected her small bag, Henry waited patiently on the stairs. "We should move quickly," he advised. "Your husband gathered a search party this morning, but they're focusing on the hills north of town. We can slip out to the east without much notice if we go now." Alina nodded, suddenly lightheaded as she stood. Henry noticed immediately and climbed the remaining stairs to offer his arm for support. His gentleness when he touched her elbow was so foreign that Alina almost pulled away out of habit. "Sorry," Henry said, misreading her reaction. "I didn't mean to startle you." "No, it's—" Alina struggled to explain. "I'm not used to careful handling." Understanding darkened Henry's eyes, but he kept his voice even. "We'll take it slow down the stairs. Just lean on me if you need to." The journey down the narrow servant staircase was treacherous in Alina's weakened state, but Henry's steady presence made it manageable. When they reached the second floor, Alina involuntarily stiffened. half expecting Victor to materialize from one of the rooms. "He's not here," Henry assured her, seeming to read her thoughts. "I checked the entire house before I found you." They moved quickly through the main floor and out the back door to where Henry had tethered his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's strong enough to carry us both until we can get you your own mount." Alina approached the animal cautiously. It had been years since she'd ridden, her father having sold their horses when times got hard, and Victor never allowing her near his prized thoroughbreds. Rusty lowered his head to sniff her outstretched hand, then nickered softly. "He likes you," Henry observed, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "That's a good sign." Henry helped Alina onto the saddle before mounting behind her. The closeness of another person would normally have made Alina tense, but there was something reassuring about Henry's presence, an aura of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. "We'll stick to the tree line and cross Crowley's Creek to mask our trail," Henry explained as they set off at a careful pace. "It's a longer route, but less chance of being spotted." Alina nodded, focused on remaining upright as waves of exhaustion washed over her. The baby seemed to have settled for now, the gentle rocking motion of the horse perhaps lulling it as it did her. Despite her best efforts, she found herself leaning back against Henry's chest as they rode, her body surrendering to fatigue. "It's all right," he murmured when she tried to straighten up, embarrassed by her weakness. "Rest while you can. I've got you." Those three simple words, "I've got you," nearly broke the dam of emotions Alina had built to survive her marriage. No one had got her in so long. She had been entirely on her own. She blinked back tears and focused on the passing landscape, unwilling to let this stranger see her cry. They rode for nearly 2 hours, taking a winding path through wooded areas and shallow creek beds. Henry was skilled at navigating the terrain, guiding Rusty with subtle commands that barely disturbed Alina's half-dozing state. Eventually, the trees thinned, revealing a small valley where a modest ranch house stood, smoke curling from its chimney. A split-rail fence enclosed several acres of pasture where a handful of horses grazed peacefully. "That's the Circle B," Henry said. "My sister Beth and her husband James Bishop run it. It's not much compared to Blackwell's place, but it's honest and it's safe." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. She was tall and straight-backed, with hair the same light brown as Henry's tied back in a practical braid. When she recognized her brother, she waved, then paused, noticing the second rider. "Beth's good people," Henry assured Alina as they rode into the yard. "She'll understand." Beth Bishop approached as Henry helped Alina dismount, her expression curious but not unwelcoming. "Henry, wasn't expecting you until Sunday dinner." "Beth, this is Alina," Henry said simply. "She needs a safe place to stay for a while." Beth's sharp eyes took in Alina's condition, the fading bruise on her wrist and her obvious exhaustion. Her expression softened immediately. "Victor Blackwell's wife." Alina stiffened, fear returning in a rush. If Beth knew who she was. "Former wife," Henry corrected firmly, placing a protective hand on Alina's shoulder. "And she needs our help." Beth studied Alina for another moment, then nodded decisively. "Well, you look dead on your feet and that baby needs you rested. Come on inside." "I just put on a stew that could use another hour anyway, and we can get you settled." The simple acceptance in Beth's voice nearly undid Alina completely. She managed a whispered thank you as she followed Beth toward the house, Henry falling in step beside her. The ranch house was modest but welcoming, with well-worn furniture and colorful quilts that gave it a homey feel entirely different from the cold opulence of Victor's mansion. Beth led Alina to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is our spare room," she explained, pulling fresh linens from a chest at the foot of the bed. It's not fancy, but it's private and the mattress is decent. There's a wash basin on the dresser there, and I'll bring you some hot water and a clean nightgown." Alina sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how to thank you." Beth waved away her gratitude. "No need. Henry doesn't bring strays home unless they're worth helping." Her direct gaze softened. "And no woman deserves what I suspect you've been through, especially not one carrying a child." After Beth left to fetch the promised hot water, Henry lingered in the doorway, hat in hand. "I need to head back to town before my absence is noticed," he explained. "The sheriff will expect a report on the search for you." Fear clutched at Alina's heart. "What will you tell him?" "That I searched the area Blackwell suggested and found no sign of you," Henry replied. "It's not even a lie. He sent me to your house, and technically, I didn't find you there, you found me." The distinction might have made Alina smile under different circumstances. Instead, she just nodded tiredly. "I'll come back tomorrow when I can get away," Henry promised. "In the meantime, you're safe here with Beth and James. No one will look for you at the Circle B." "Thank you," Alina said softly. "I know those words aren't enough, but they're plenty," Henry interrupted gently. "Just rest and take care of yourself and that baby, that's thanks enough." After he left, Beth returned with hot water, a clean nightgown, and a bowl of broth that smelled divine. "Get washed up and changed, then drink this," she instructed. "The stew will be ready by the time you wake, and you'll need proper food to keep your strength up." Left alone, Alina moved through the tasks mechanically, her body operating on instinct while her mind tried to process the dramatic shift in her circumstances. Just that morning, she had been trapped in an attic, certain there was no escape from Victor's control. Now she was miles away in a strange but welcoming house, helped by people who owed her nothing. As she settled into the clean bed, her body finally gave in to exhaustion. Her last coherent thought before sleep claimed her was that, for the first time in months, she didn't have to listen for Victor's footsteps or plan how to avoid his anger. Just that simple absence of fear felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. Alina slept deeply for hours, waking only when the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the small window of her room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was, panic rising in her throat as she sat up abruptly. Then the events of the day came rushing back, and she exhaled slowly, one hand automatically finding her stomach to reassure herself the baby was still there, still safe. A soft knock at the door preceded Beth's entrance. She carried a tray with a steaming bowl and a cup of tea. "Thought you might prefer to eat in here tonight," she said, setting the tray on a small table. "Tomorrow you can join us properly, but you looked like you could use the quiet." "Thank you," Alina said, realizing she was ravenous. The stew was hearty, filled with chunks of beef, carrots, and potatoes in a rich broth that tasted of home in a way Victor's fancy French-inspired meals never had. Beth sat in the chair by the window, watching Alina eat with satisfaction. "Henry told me a bit about your situation before he left," she said once Alina had eaten most of the stew. "Not details, mind you. He respects your privacy, but enough that James and I understand what we're getting into." Alina set down her spoon, anxiety creeping back. "And what is that exactly?" Beth's direct gaze was assessing but not unkind. "Harboring a woman escaping an abusive husband, a powerful one at that." She shrugged slightly. "It's not the first time the Circle B has been a refuge, though usually it's for young men in need of honest work and a second chance, not pregnant women running from wealthy businessmen." "I'm putting you in danger," Alina realized, "if Victor finds out you helped me." "Victor Blackwell doesn't scare us," Beth said firmly. "This land has been in James's family for 3 generations. We don't owe anyone money, and we don't need anyone's approval to live as we see fit." Her expression softened. "Besides, Henry wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't think it was the right thing to do, and I trust my brother's judgment." Alina studied the woman across from her, seeing the family resemblance to Henry not just in her features but in her straightforward decency. "Still, I can't stay here indefinitely. Once the baby comes, let's not borrow trouble," Beth interrupted gently. "You're safe now, and that's what matters. The future will sort itself out in time." That night, Alina slept better than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The next morning, she met James Bishop, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes who spoke little but nodded approvingly when Beth explained their guest would be staying for a spell. He asked no questions, simply welcomed her to their home and went about his business tending to the ranch. By mid-afternoon, Alina had begun to feel restless after so many months of confinement in Victor's house. Beth, observing her gazing out the window, suggested a short walk to the nearby creek. "Fresh air does wonders for a person," Beth said as they followed a worn path through a meadow of late wildflowers, "especially one carrying a child." Alina inhaled deeply, feeling the cool autumn air fill her lungs. "It's beautiful here," she commented. "Peaceful." Beth nodded. "We like it. It's not much by some standards, but it's ours, free and clear." She glanced sideways at Alina. "Henry mentioned your former husband, has one of the biggest houses in Placerville." "A gilded cage," Alina replied softly. "I would have traded every crystal chandelier and silk curtain for a single day of peace like this." They walked in companionable silence until they reached the creek, where they sat on a fallen log, listening to the water burble over stones. Alina felt the baby stir, more active now that she herself was calmer. "Have you thought of names?" Beth asked, noticing Alina's hand on her stomach. "Not really," Alina admitted. "It never felt safe to plan that far ahead." Beth's expression darkened momentarily, but she kept her voice light. "Well, you have time now. About 5 months by the look of it," Alina nodded. "The baby should come in February if Dr. Williams's calculations are correct." "Good strong winter babies, February births," Beth said approvingly. "My Henry was born in February, tough as nails from his first breath." The mention of Henry brought color to Alina's cheeks, a reaction that didn't escape Beth's notice. A knowing smile tugged at the older woman's lips, but she made no comment, instead pointing out a blue jay flitting among the trees across the creek. They were heading back to the house when the sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. Alina's heart leapt to her throat before she recognized the rider as Henry, his deputy's badge catching the afternoon sunlight as he approached. "Ladies," he greeted them, dismounting smoothly. He looked tired, Alina thought, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much. "Any news?" Beth asked, her casual tone belied by the tension in her shoulders. Henry's expression was grim. "Blackwell's expanded the search. He's offering a $100 reward for information about Alina's whereabouts. Claims she's mentally unstable and a danger to herself and the unborn child." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. $100 was a fortune to most people in Placerville. "Someone will talk," she whispered, "for that kind of money." "No one knows you're here except the 3 of us," Henry reminded her. "And it'll stay that way." Beth nodded firmly. "James doesn't even know your full story, just that you needed help, and he wouldn't breathe a word anyway." They walked back to the house together, Henry leading Rusty by the reins. Despite their reassurances, Alina could feel anxiety building in her chest. Victor wouldn't give up easily. His pride alone would demand he find her, to say nothing of his possessiveness. Inside, Beth busied herself making coffee while Henry and Alina sat at the kitchen table. "The sheriff asked me to join one of the search parties tomorrow," Henry said, keeping his voice low. "They're combing the foothills to the north." "That's good, isn't it?" Alina asked. "It means they're looking in the wrong direction," Henry nodded. For now, but Blackwell's determined. He's brought in some men from Sacramento, professionals, not locals, trackers by the look of them. Aliner's hands began to tremble. He'll find me eventually. Victor always gets what he wants. Henry reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch was startling, grounding. "Not this time," he said firmly. "I promise you that." The conviction in his voice made Aliner want to believe him, despite the fear gnawing at her. She hadn't known this man for even a full day, yet she found herself trusting him in a way she had never trusted anyone since her mother's death. Beth returned with 3 cups of strong black coffee, setting them down before taking a seat. "So what's the plan, little brother?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Keep Aliner here until the initial furor dies down. Blackwell can't maintain this level of searching forever. Eventually, he'll have to return to his business dealings." "And then," Aliner pressed. "I can't hide forever." "No," Henry agreed. "But we can buy enough time to make more permanent arrangements. I have a friend in San Francisco who might help. He owes me a favor, and he's far enough removed from Placerville that Blackwell wouldn't have any influence there." San Francisco. Aliner tried to imagine starting over in the bustling city by the bay. It seemed both terrifying and liberating. "I have some money," she offered. "Not much, but enough to get started somewhere new." Henry nodded. "That's good. But first, we need to wait out this initial search. Stay close to the house for now, just to be safe." Over the next week, Aliner settled into life at the Circle B. Beth showed her how to manage the kitchen garden and preserve the late harvest vegetables. James, though quiet, was unfailingly kind, teaching Aliner how to collect eggs from the henhouse without getting pecked, a surprisingly difficult skill. The physical work was tiring in her condition, but it also felt healing, connecting her to a simpler way of life she had almost forgotten. Henry visited every other day, bringing news from town. The search for Aliner continued, though with less manpower as the days passed. Victor, however, showed no signs of giving up. He had even brought in a Pinkerton detective from San Francisco, a development that made Henry frown deeply when he reported it. "Pinkertons are thorough," he explained when Aliner asked why this was particularly concerning. "They don't give up easily, and they have resources beyond local law enforcement. So I'll need to leave sooner rather than later," Aliner concluded, her hand instinctively moving to her growing stomach. Henry's expression softened. "Not immediately. But yes, we should start making arrangements. I've written to my friend in San Francisco. He owns a boarding house near the docks. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe, and he keeps to himself." The thought of leaving the sanctuary of the Circle B filled Aliner with mixed emotions. In just a week, she had come to love the rhythm of life there, the simple honesty of hard work and quiet evenings. Beth had become more than a hostess. She was rapidly becoming a friend, filling some of the void left by Aliner's mother's death. And then there was Henry. He never stayed long on his visits, aware of the risk of creating a pattern that might be noticed, but those brief hours had become the highlight of Aliner's days. There was something in his steady presence that calmed her, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. "You're quiet tonight," Beth observed as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. James had gone to check on a mare about to foal, leaving the 2 women alone. Aliner sighed. "Just thinking about what comes next. San Francisco seems so overwhelming." Beth studied her for a moment. It would be for a woman alone, especially one with a child on the way. "I don't have much choice," Aliner said resignedly. "Victor won't stop looking for me here." "There are always choices," Beth replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Not always easy ones, mind you." Aliner glanced at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" Beth seemed to choose her words carefully. "Henry's a good man, the best I know, in fact. He doesn't make promises lightly, and he's promised to help you." "I know," Alina said, confused by the direction of the conversation, "and I'm grateful." "That's not what I meant," Beth said gently. "I've known my brother his whole life. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Heat rushed to Alina's cheeks. "That's—" "He's just being kind." Beth laughed softly. "Henry's kind to everyone. This is different." She patted Alina's hand. "Just something to consider before you rush off to San Francisco alone." Alina lay awake long that night, Beth's words circling in her mind. She had noticed Henry's attentiveness, of course, but had attributed it to his natural protective instincts. The idea that he might feel something more sent a confusing mixture of hope and fear through her. Her experience with Victor had left deep wounds, making the very concept of trusting another man terrifying. And yet, Henry was nothing like Victor. Where Victor had been smooth and calculating, Henry was straightforward and honest. Where Victor's anger had been unpredictable and explosive, Henry's rare displays of temper usually when discussing Victor were controlled and principled. Most importantly, when Henry looked at her, Alina never saw the possessiveness that had characterized Victor's gaze from the beginning. Instead, there was respect, concern, and something warmer that she had been afraid to name. The next day, Henry arrived earlier than usual, his expression grave. He asked to speak with Alina privately, and Beth tactfully made herself scarce, claiming the chickens needed tending. "What's happened?" Alina asked as soon as they were alone in the small parlor. Henry removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "The Pinkerton agent has been asking questions about me, specifically about my whereabouts the day you disappeared." Alina's stomach dropped. "They suspect you helped me." "Nothing that direct," Henry said, shaking his head, "but he's thorough. He's been building a timeline, interviewing everyone who saw me that day. Sooner or later, he'll realize there's a gap between when I left your house and when I returned to the sheriff's office. And if they find out you helped me, I'd lose my badge at minimum," Henry acknowledged, "possibly face charges for interfering in a domestic matter. But that's not why I'm concerned." Alina waited, heart pounding, as Henry seemed to gather his thoughts. "If they're looking at me, they might start looking at my connections, including Beth and the Circle B." He met her gaze directly. "You're not safe here anymore." The words hit Alina like a physical blow, though she had known from the beginning that her stay at the ranch was temporary. "When do I need to leave?" "Tonight," Henry said, his voice heavy with regret. "I've arranged for a wagon to take you to Auburn. From there, you can catch the train to Sacramento and then on to San Francisco. My friend is expecting you by the end of the week." Alina nodded mechanically, her mind racing to adjust to this accelerated timeline. "I'll pack my things." Henry caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Alina, wait." His touch was gentle but firm. "There's another option, one I hadn't planned to offer so soon, but circumstances have changed." She looked at him questioningly, noticing the unusual tension in his shoulders, the careful way he was choosing his words. "Come with me," he said simply. Alina blinked in confusion. "With you?" "Where?" "Oregon," Henry replied. "I have family there, cousins who own a logging operation near Portland. They've been asking me to join them for years. It's good, honest work, far from Blackwell's reach. You would leave Placerville, your job, your sister." Alina couldn't comprehend why he would make such a sacrifice. Henry's blue eyes held hers steadily. For the right reason, yes. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Alina felt breathless suddenly, as if the room had too little air. "Henry, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you're brave and resilient. I know you care deeply for the child you're carrying. I know you deserve a life free from fear." He paused, then added more softly, and I know that the thought of you disappearing to San Francisco alone makes me more unsettled than I care to admit." Alina felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "It's not that simple. I'm still legally married to Victor, and I'm carrying his child. The first problem can be solved with time and distance," Henry said pragmatically. "As for the second, any man worthy of the name would be proud to raise that child as his own." The sincerity in his voice made Alina's heart constrict. It was too much, too fast, and yet, wasn't that how life often happened? Her marriage to Victor had been arranged over weeks, a calculated business transaction disguised as courtship. This Henry's offer was different. Impulsive, perhaps, but rooted in genuine concern and growing affection. "I need time to think," she finally said. Henry nodded, releasing her hand. "Of course. But not too much time, I'm afraid. The wagon will be here at nightfall." As Henry went to confer with James about the details of Alina's departure, Beth found her in the spare room, carefully folding the few items of clothing she possessed into her small bag. "Henry told me about the change in plans," Beth said, leaning against the doorframe. "And about his offer." Alina looked up, unable to read Beth's expression. "What do you think I should do?" Beth entered the room fully, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you this. Henry doesn't make decisions lightly, especially not ones that would change the course of his life. If he's offered to take you to Oregon, he means it with his whole heart." "It seems so sudden," Alina said, folding a shawl with unnecessary precision. "Sometimes life is sudden," Beth replied. "James proposed to me the day after we met at a church social. My father thought he was crazy. Maybe he was." She smiled at the memory. 15 years later, I can't imagine my life any other way." Alina set down the shawl, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of Henry, of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person again." Beth's expression softened. "That's natural after what you've been through. But from what I've seen, the only mistake would be letting fear stop you from following your heart." The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations. James checked and rechecked the wagon that would take Alina to Auburn, making sure the springs were sound and the canvas cover secure. Beth packed a basket of food for the journey: bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and a jar of preserves. Henry disappeared for several hours, returning as the sun was beginning to set with documents he didn't explain, and a small revolver he showed Alina how to use, just in case. As the moment of departure approached, Alina felt increasingly torn. The practical choice was clear. San Francisco offered anonymity, a clean break, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. But when she thought of facing the future alone, the birth of her child, the struggles of single motherhood in a strange city, a deep loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. And then there was Henry, steadfast and honorable, offering not just protection but companionship. In the short time she had known him, he had shown her more kindness and respect than Victor had in their entire marriage. Could she trust that? Dare she believe in the possibility of a different kind of life, a different kind of relationship? The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains when James brought the wagon to the front of the house. "It's time," he said simply, helping Beth secure the last of the supplies. Henry approached Alina, who stood on the porch, still undecided. "We need to leave now to reach the Auburn station by morning," he said gently. "Have you thought about what I said?" Alina looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I have," she replied. "But before I give you my answer, I need to know something. Why are you doing this? The truth, Henry." He held her gaze, no hesitation in his blue eyes. "Because from the moment I heard your voice in that attic, something changed for me. I can't explain it better than that. I just know that the thought of you facing this world alone doesn't sit right with me, and the thought of never seeing you again sits even worse." It wasn't a declaration of love, they both knew it was too soon for that, but it was honest in a way that touched Alina deeply. This man, unlike Victor, didn't deal in grand promises or flowery words. He offered what he could, what he knew to be true without pretense. "Oregon is a long way," she said softly. "Yes," Henry agreed. "Far from Placerville, far from Victor Blackwell." Alina took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the ruins of her old life. Ahead, unknown territory. The choice was hers, perhaps the first real choice she had been allowed to make in years. "Then I think I'd like to see Oregon," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "With you." The smile that broke across Henry's face was like sunrise, transforming his serious features. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll do everything in my power to make sure you never regret that decision." Beth, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, let out a small whoop of joy. "I knew it. James, you owe me $1. James, loading the last of Alina's things into the wagon, merely smiled and shook his head. "Never bet against a woman's intuition," he advised Henry with good-natured resignation. The goodbyes were brief but heartfelt, with promises to write once they were settled. Beth hugged Alina fiercely, whispering, "You found a good man. Hold on to him." James shook Henry's hand, then surprised him with a rough embrace, slipping something into his pocket as he did. As the wagon pulled away from the Circle B, Alina looked back at the small ranch house, a lump in her throat. For a brief time, it had been a haven, a place of healing. She would carry its memory with her always. Henry drove steadily through the gathering darkness, following a little-used trail that wound through the foothills. They spoke little at first, both processing the magnitude of the decision they had made. After about an hour, Henry reached into his pocket and withdrew what James had given him, a small leather pouch that clinked softly. "What did James give you?" Alina asked. Henry opened the pouch and tipped the contents into his palm. 2 plain gold bands. "His and Beth's first wedding rings," he explained, visibly moved by the gesture. "They replaced them with new ones on their 10th anniversary." Alina stared at the rings, understanding their significance. "That's very generous of them." "James is practical," Henry said, returning the rings to the pouch. "A woman traveling with a man presumed to be her husband faces fewer questions than one traveling alone." It made sense, of course. They would need to present themselves as married once they reached Oregon. Still, the sight of those rings, tangible symbols of a commitment neither of them had formally made, sent a flutter of nervousness through Alina's stomach. Henry seemed to sense her unease. "Just a practical measure for now," he assured her, tucking the pouch back into his pocket. "Nothing more." They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat some of the food Beth had packed. By dawn, they had reached the outskirts of Auburn, a growing town that served as a transportation hub for the region. "We'll need to separate here," Henry explained as they approached the town. "I'll secure the tickets while you wait at the station. Less chance of being noticed that way." The train station was busy even at that early hour, filled with miners heading to the diggings, businessmen traveling to Sacramento, and families visiting relatives. Alina kept her head down, a shawl pulled over her hair, as she waited on a bench near the platform. Henry returned with 2 tickets to Sacramento. "From there, we'll catch the steamer to San Francisco, then board another to Portland," he explained in a low voice. "I've sent telegrams ahead to my cousins. They'll be expecting us in about a week." The train arrived in a cloud of steam and cinders, passengers disembarking before new ones could board. Henry guided Alina to a car near the middle of the train, finding seats away from the windows. As they settled in, Alina felt the weight of the past few weeks begin to lift. They were in motion now, leaving behind Placerville and all its painful memories. "Are you all right?" Henry asked quietly as the train lurched forward. Eleanor nodded, then admitted, nervous, "I've never been farther than Sacramento before." "It's a big step," Henry acknowledged. "But sometimes the biggest steps lead to the best places." As the train picked up speed, carrying them toward Sacramento and beyond, Eleanor found herself believing him. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope not just for safety, but for happiness. The journey from Auburn to Sacramento passed without incident, the train arriving at the bustling river port by mid-morning. Henry led Eleanor through crowds of travelers to the docks where steamships waited to transport passengers and cargo to San Francisco. "We have a few hours before the steamer departs," Henry said, consulting his pocket watch. "We should get something to eat and perhaps find you some additional clothing for the journey north." Eleanor was acutely aware of how conspicuous she must look in her worn dress, now several days unwashed from their hasty departure. "I have a little money," she began, but Henry shook his head. "James was more generous than just the rings," he said with a small smile. "He insisted I take some of the money he'd been saving for new breeding stock, said it was an investment in family." The simple statement brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. The Bishops had known her only briefly, yet had treated her with more kindness than her own father had shown in years. "We'll pay them back someday," she promised. "I expect we will," Henry agreed. Once we're settled in Oregon, they found a modest cafe near the docks where they could eat without attracting attention. Afterward, Henry took Eleanor to a dry goods store where she selected 2 practical dresses that would accommodate her growing pregnancy: a warm coat for the northern climate and basic necessities for the journey. By the time they boarded the steamer to San Francisco, Eleanor was exhausted but more prepared for what lay ahead. Henry secured a small private cabin, an expense he deemed necessary given Eleanor's condition and their need for privacy. "You should rest," he said once they were settled in the cramped but clean cabin. "I'll check on our connections in San Francisco." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the narrow bunk, her body aching from the constant travel. The baby had been active all day, perhaps responding to her own nervous energy. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling a strong kick against her palm. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're going to have a new life far away from here." She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Henry was gently shaking her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said softly, "we're approaching San Francisco." Blinking away sleep, Eleanor followed him to the deck, where the famous fog was rolling in from the Pacific. Through breaks in the mist, she caught glimpses of the bustling city spread across hills, with ships from around the world crowding its harbor. "It's incredible," she breathed, having never seen anything like it. Henry nodded. "Wait until you see Portland, smaller but beautiful in its own way. Surrounded by forests instead of ocean." They disembarked among throngs of passengers, Henry keeping a protective hand at Eleanor's elbow as they navigated the chaotic wharf. San Francisco was a city of contrasts, elegant hotels and restaurants standing alongside rough saloons and gambling halls, with people from every corner of the world mingling on its streets. Their steamer to Portland wouldn't depart until the following morning, so Henry found them lodging at a modest hotel near the docks. He registered them as Mr. and Mrs. Henry Blackwood, using one of James's rings to support the fiction. If the desk clerk noticed that Eleanor wore no matching band, he gave no indication. "I'll take the floor," Henry said once they were alone in the small room, which contained only a single bed, a washstand, and a straight-back chair. Eleanor's protest died on her lips at his matter-of-fact tone. Despite their hasty departure and the intimacy of traveling together, Henry had maintained a careful respectfulness that reassured her. He had never presumed, never overstepped, treating her with a consideration that made her feel valued rather than possessed. That evening, they ventured out to find dinner at a nearby restaurant that catered to travelers. The city's energy was both exhilarating and overwhelming after the quiet of the Circle B. "Have you been to San Francisco before?" Alina asked as they waited for their food. Henry nodded. "A few times, mostly official business transporting prisoners or delivering documents to the federal courthouse. And Portland, once when I was younger. My father took me to visit the cousins I mentioned." A shadow crossed his face. "After he died, I lost touch with them for a while. But we've exchanged letters over the years." Alina realized how little she knew about this man who had risked everything to help her. "Tell me about your family," she urged gently. Over the simple meal, Henry shared pieces of his past. His father, a former lawman who had instilled in him a strong sense of justice. His mother, who had endured an abusive first marriage before finding happiness with Henry's father. His childhood with Beth in a small town north of Placerville. In return, Alina spoke of her own life before Victor, her mother's gentle influence, her father's slow descent into gambling and drinking after her mother's death, the dreams she had once harbored of becoming a teacher before financial necessity had forced her into marriage. By the time they returned to the hotel, something had shifted between them. The sharing of histories had created a deeper connection, a foundation of understanding that went beyond their unusual circumstances. That night, as Henry arranged a makeshift bed on the floor using extra blankets from the closet, Alina found herself wishing she had the courage to offer an alternative. But memories of Victor's demands, his entitlement to her body regardless of her wishes, held her back. Henry deserved more than a woman still haunted by another man's cruelty. The steamer to Portland departed at dawn, a larger vessel than the one from Sacramento, as it would navigate the open Pacific for part of the journey. Henry had secured another private cabin, anticipating a 3-day voyage if the weather held. As they stood on deck watching San Francisco recede into the distance, Alina felt a strange mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. Everything familiar was behind her now. California, her home since birth, disappearing into the horizon. Ahead lay the unknown, Oregon, a new life and whatever future she and Henry might build together. The journey north tested them both. Alina suffered from seasickness as the steamer encountered rougher waters beyond the Golden Gate. Henry cared for her with gentle efficiency, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her weak tea and dry crackers when she could manage to eat, reading to her from a book of poetry he had purchased in San Francisco when she needed distraction from her misery. By the 3rd day, as the steamer entered the Columbia River for the final leg to Portland, Alina's seasickness had subsided enough for her to join Henry on deck. The scenery had changed dramatically. Lush green forests lined the riverbanks, with snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. "It's beautiful," she said, drinking in the wild landscape so different from the golden hills of California. "This is only the beginning," Henry told her, a note of pride in his voice. "Wait until you see the logging camp. It's about 20 miles from Portland, nestled in some of the tallest trees you've ever seen." Alina tried to imagine their life in such a place, remote, rugged, far from the comforts of town living. Yet the very isolation that might have intimidated her once now seemed appealing. What better place to start anew than somewhere Victor would never think to look? They arrived in Portland on a clear autumn morning, the young city bustling with activity as timber and agricultural products were loaded onto ships bound for San Francisco and beyond. Henry's cousins, Matthew and Joseph Blackwood, met them at the docks with hearty handshakes for Henry and courteous nods to Alina. "So this is the wife we've heard so little about," Matthew said with a grin, his resemblance to Henry striking except for a beard that reached nearly to his chest. Henry's telegram just said he was bringing his wife home to Oregon. Quite a surprise, cousin. Elinor tensed, uncertain how to respond to the familiar fiction that was becoming their reality. Henry placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back. "It's been a whirlwind," he said smoothly. "But sometimes you just know when something's right." Joseph, the younger of the brothers, studied Elinor more carefully, his gaze lingering on her evident pregnancy. "Well, your family now," he said finally, his tone warm despite the scrutiny. "And family is everything to the Blackwoods." They traveled to the logging camp in a sturdy wagon, Elinor seated between Henry and Joseph while Matthew drove. The brothers caught Henry up on family news and the business of the logging operation, tactfully avoiding direct questions about the sudden marriage or the child Elinor carried. The camp itself was larger than Elinor had expected, a collection of solid log cabins surrounding a central cookhouse, with a small store and office building where the business of timber was conducted. Beyond the cleared area, massive trees stretched as far as the eye could see, their scent filling the air with a clean, resinous fragrance. "We've prepared the old foreman's cabin for you," Matthew explained as they approached a structure set slightly apart from the others. "Jenkins moved into town last month, so the timing worked out well." The cabin was simple but sturdy, with 2 small rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out onto the forest. Someone had made an effort to welcome them. A fire burned in the hearth, fresh pine boughs decorated the mantel, and a loaf of bread and jar of preserves sat on the rough-hewn table. "Martha's work," Joseph explained, noting Elinor's surprise at the touches. "My wife. She'll be by tomorrow to properly welcome you, but she wanted you to have something homey tonight." After the brothers left them to settle in, Henry and Elinor stood in the middle of the main room, the reality of their situation suddenly stark. This was no temporary arrangement, no stopover on a journey. This cabin was to be their home, the beginning of their life together. "It's not much," Henry said, uncertainty in his voice for the first time since she'd known him. "Nothing like you're used to, I'm sure." Elinor looked around at the simple furnishings, the solid walls, the warm hearth. Nothing like Victor's cold mansion with its formal parlors where she had never felt comfortable. Nothing like the rooms where she had lived in fear. "It's perfect," she said softly, meaning it. "It feels safe." The tension in Henry's shoulders eased. "It is safe. No one will find you here, Elinor. I promise you that." She crossed to him then, moved by the sincerity in his voice, the steadfast commitment he had shown from the moment he had heard her voice in that attic. Without overthinking, she reached up and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Henry remained very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice husky. "I would do it all again." Elinor rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, a gesture of gratitude, but also something more, an acknowledgement of the feelings growing between them, still tender but undeniably real. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Elinor met the other women at the camp, wives of loggers and mill workers who welcomed her with practical gifts and offers of assistance. Martha Blackwood, Joseph's wife, proved especially helpful, showing Elinor the routines of camp life and introducing her to the basics of cooking on a wood stove. Henry integrated back into the logging operation as if he had never left, his strength and skill earning him immediate respect among the men. Each evening he returned to the cabin tired but satisfied, sharing stories of the day's work while Elinor prepared simple meals from the supplies provided by the camp cookhouse and the small garden Martha had helped her start. They developed a domestic rhythm that felt surprisingly natural, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Henry continued to sleep on a pallet by the fireplace, never pressing for more than Alina was ready to give. Yet their evenings were filled with conversation that deepened their connection. They shared books, memories, hopes for the future, building a foundation of friendship that Alina came to treasure. As Christmas approached, bringing with it heavy snows that blanketed the forest in pristine white, the physical distance Henry had maintained began to feel less like respect and more like a barrier. Alina found herself watching him as he split firewood or repaired tools, admiring the strength in his hands, the way firelight caught in his hair in the evenings. She wondered if he noticed how her feelings were changing, deepening beyond gratitude into something richer. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Alina finally found the courage to address what had been growing between them. "Henry," she began, setting aside the baby blanket she had been knitting, "we need to talk about us, what we are to each other." He looked up from the ledger he had been reviewing for Matthew, his expression guarded. "What do you mean?" Alina clasped her hands in her lap, suddenly nervous. "Everyone here believes we're married. We wear the rings, share this cabin, carry the same name, but we both know it's not real." Henry set the ledger aside. "No," he agreed quietly, "it's not. Yet sometimes," she continued carefully, "it feels real, at least to me." The fire popped and crackled in the hearth, filling the silence that stretched between them. Henry's gaze was steady, thoughtful. "Alina," he finally said, "when I asked you to come with me to Oregon, it wasn't just to protect you, though that was part of it. It was because I couldn't bear the thought of not knowing you better, not seeing what might grow between us." He paused, choosing his words with care. "But I never wanted you to feel obligated. You've had enough of men making demands on you." The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "That's why this feels so different," she said softly. "You've never demanded anything, not once." Henry leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I want whatever is between us to be your choice, completely and freely." "I can wait," Alina shook her head, cutting him off. "I don't want to wait anymore. These past weeks have shown me what it can be like with a good man. A man who respects me, who sees me as a person, not a possession." She took a deep breath. "I may still legally be Victor's wife, but in my heart, I've made a different choice." Henry rose from his chair and crossed to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Alina nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm saying I love you, Henry Blackwood. Not because you rescued me, though I'll always be grateful for that, but because of who you are: honorable, kind, patient." She smiled tremulously. "Because you make me feel safe and valued and heard." Henry's hands tightened around hers. "I love you too, Alina. I think I have since that first day in the attic, though I didn't have a name for it then." It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love, and its utterance seemed to release something that had been building between them for weeks. Henry reached up to cup her cheek gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Alina's answer was to lean forward, bridging the small distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like Victor's demanding possession. Henry's lips were warm against hers, his touch reverent, as if she were something precious he feared might break. When they parted, Alina saw in Henry's eyes all the love and promise she had begun to hope for. That night, for the first time, they shared the small bed in the cabin's second room, not for passion, which would wait until they were truly wed, but for the simple comfort of being held through the night in loving arms. Christmas at the logging camp brought a week of festivities that surprised Alina with their warmth and community spirit. Work halted except for essential maintenance, and the cookhouse became the center of celebrations that included a shared feast. Music played on instruments brought out from storage, and handmade gifts exchanged between families. Henry gifted Alina a rocking chair he had been secretly crafting in the camp's workshop, its pine surface sanded to satin smoothness. "For when the baby comes," he said, as she ran her hands over the curved arms in wonder. Her gift to him was more modest, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, made from yarn Martha had helped her obtain from Portland. As January's deep snows gave way to February's milder but persistent rains, Aliner's time grew near. The baby had dropped lower, making breathing easier but walking more difficult. Henry hovered anxiously, insisting on taking over more of the household chores despite his long days of work. Martha and the other women of the camp visited regularly, bringing advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and the comfort of experienced motherhood. They helped prepare the small second bedroom, setting up a cradle Joseph had carved and lining a drawer with soft flannel for the baby's first bed. Dr. Peterson, the camp's physician, checked on Aliner weekly, assuring her that everything progressed normally. "First babies often take their time," he told her with avuncular confidence. "But yours looks to be a strong one, and you're healthy despite your earlier hardships." On the evening of February 12, 1869, as rain drummed steadily on the cabin's roof, Aliner felt the first cramping pains that signaled the beginning of labor. Henry was beside himself with nervous energy, running to fetch Martha and the doctor, despite Aliner's assurances that first babies typically took many hours to arrive. She was right, the labor progressed slowly through the night and into the next day. Henry was banished to the main room of the cabin, where he paced endlessly, while Martha and Dr. Peterson attended Aliner. Joseph and Matthew took turns sitting with him, offering distractions that Henry barely acknowledged, his entire being focused on the muffled sounds coming from behind the bedroom door. Finally, as dusk fell on February 13, a new cry joined the patter of rain, thin and indignant at first, then strengthening into a healthy wail that brought Henry bolt upright from the chair where he had finally been persuaded to sit. Dr. Peterson emerged from the bedroom, his serious face breaking into a smile. "You have a son, Henry, a strong, healthy boy, and Aliner is doing well, just exhausted as you'd expect." Henry felt his knees weaken with relief and joy. A son. The child Aliner had carried through so much hardship and fear had arrived safely into the world. "Can I see them?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The doctor nodded, stepping aside to allow Henry to enter the bedroom. Aliner lay propped up on pillows, her face pale with exhaustion but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Henry approached, her eyes shining with tears and triumph. "Henry," she whispered, "come meet your son." Henry sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the moment. The baby's face was tiny and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and features that echoed Aliner's delicate nose and chin. "He's beautiful," Henry murmured, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's small hand. Instantly, tiny fingers curled around his in a grip surprisingly strong for one so new to the world. "I thought we might name him William," Aliner said softly, "after your father." The suggestion, so thoughtful and unexpected, filled Henry with emotion. "William," he repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." As Martha discreetly withdrew to give them privacy, Henry leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to Aliner's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "For him, for trusting me, for everything." Aliner shifted slightly, wincing at the movement to make space beside her on the bed. "Hold him," she urged, carefully transferring the bundle to Henry's arms. The weight of his son, for that, was how Henry already thought of him, regardless of biology, settled against his chest with a rightness that defied explanation. In that moment, looking down at the child and then at the woman who had brought him into the world, Henry felt a completeness he had never known before. "I love you both," he said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. Aliner smiled tiredly, reaching out to touch his arm. "And we love you, our protector. our home. News of William's birth spread quickly through the logging camp, bringing a stream of visitors bearing gifts and good wishes in the days that followed. Eleanor recovered rapidly, her natural resilience reasserting itself as she adapted to motherhood, with a quiet confidence that impressed even the most experienced mothers among the camp wives. Henry watched in awe as she nursed the baby, soothed his cries, and somehow maintained their home despite the constant demands of a newborn. He did what he could to help changing nappies with determined if awkward efforts, walking the floor with William when he was fussy at night, ensuring Eleanor had time to rest when the baby slept. As March brought the first hints of spring to the forest, Henry received a letter that he had been both expecting and dreading. It had been forwarded from Placerville to Portland, and then to the camp, its journey nearly as circuitous as their own had been. "It's from Beth," he told Eleanor as he broke the seal, William sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. Eleanor set aside her mending, anxiety tightening her features. "Is everything all right? Are they safe?" Henry scanned the pages quickly, then more slowly, his expression shifting from tension to relief. "They're fine. Better than fine." He looked up with a smile. "Victor Blackwell has left Placerville." Eleanor stared at him, disbelieving. "Left? What do you mean?" "According to Beth, he abandoned the search for you about a month after we left. Apparently, some of his business dealings weren't as legal as they appeared. The Pinkerton agent he hired was actually investigating him for fraud on behalf of his Eastern investors." Henry couldn't keep the satisfaction from his voice. He fled town just ahead of the authorities, leaving behind most of his assets. Eleanor sank back in her chair, the implications washing over her. "So he's gone just like that, not just gone wanted," Henry clarified. "There are warrants for his arrest in California and Nevada. Beth says your father tried to claim the house in town as payment for his debts, but the federal marshals seized it along with everything else. And the search for me, abandoned completely." Henry set the letter aside. "No one's looking for Eleanor Blackwell anymore." The relief was so profound that Eleanor felt momentarily dizzy with it. For months, despite the distance they had put between themselves and Placerville, she had lived with the fear that Victor would somehow find her, reclaim her and the child he believed was his. Now that shadow had lifted, suddenly and completely. "I'm free," she whispered, the words foreign on her tongue. Henry crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You've been free since the day you decided to leave," he reminded her gently. "But yes, the legal complications are simplified." Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. With Victor a fugitive, the marriage that had bound her to him was effectively voided. The path to a future with Henry was clearer now, unencumbered by the past. "There's more news," Henry continued, his expression softening. "Beth and James are expecting a child of their own in the fall." Fresh tears, happy ones, sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "Oh, that's wonderful. She'll be an amazing mother." "She learned from the best," Henry said, nodding toward William. "Just as you did." The comparison to her own mother, whose gentle guidance Eleanor had missed desperately since her passing, was deeply moving. She squeezed Henry's hands, grateful for this man who seemed to understand her so completely. "Henry," she said after a moment, her voice steady with conviction, "I think it's time we made this real, our marriage, I mean." Henry's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure?" "There's no rush, I'm sure," Eleanor interrupted gently. "William should have your name legally and truly, and I want to be your wife in more than just appearance." The look that crossed Henry's face was one of such profound happiness that Eleanor felt her breath catch. He rose from his knees to pull her into his arms, careful not to crush her against him. "Nothing would make me prouder," he murmured into her hair, "or happier." They were married on the first day of April, in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who visited the logging camp monthly. The entire camp turned out for the occasion. The cookhouse decorated with early spring wildflowers and pine boughs. Alina wore a dress of soft blue that Martha had helped her sew, with William's birth month flowers violets woven into her hair. The vows they exchanged were traditional in wording but profound in meaning for a couple whose path to the altar had been anything but conventional. When Henry slipped James's ring onto Alina's finger this time as a true token of marriage, rather than a convenient fiction, his hand trembled slightly with the significance of the moment. "I promise to cherish and protect you and William for all my days," he added in a voice meant only for her ears as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and music continuing well into the evening. William, now nearly 2 months old, was passed proudly from arm to arm, admired by the entire community that had embraced his mother so completely. That night, after the festivities had ended and they had returned to their cabin, truly their home now in every sense, Henry and Alina stood together beside William's cradle, watching their son sleep peacefully. "He looks more like you every day," Henry observed softly, his arm around Alina's waist. "Perhaps," Alina conceded, "but he has your expressions, that serious look when he's concentrating." Henry chuckled. "Poor child." They moved to the main room where the fire had burned low in the hearth. Alina felt a new shyness come over her, an awareness that this night would be different from all the others they had spent under this roof. Henry seemed to sense her nervousness. "Nothing has to change," he assured her, taking her hands in his. "Not until you're ready." Alina met his gaze, seeing there the patience and respect that had been constants in their relationship from the beginning. "I am ready," she said softly. "I have been for some time. Victor was the only man I've ever—" She faltered, unsure how to express that her only experiences with intimacy had been colored by obligation and sometimes pain. Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes. "Alina," he said gently, "what happens between us will never be like that. Never." He drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. "We have all the time in the world, tonight and all the nights to come." Their kiss deepened slowly, built on months of growing love and trust. When Henry lifted her into his arms to carry her to their bedroom, Alina felt not fear but anticipation, a welcome awakening of desires long suppressed by circumstance and survival. What followed was a revelation, tender, unhurried, focused entirely on mutual pleasure and connection. Henry's touch was gentle yet confident, his body strong yet yielding to her needs and responses. For the first time, Alina understood that physical love could be an expression of something deeper, a communion of bodies that echoed the meeting of hearts and minds. Afterward, lying in the circle of Henry's arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Alina felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any physical place could provide. The journey from that attic in Placerville to this moment had been arduous and unexpected, but she wouldn't have changed it, not if doing so meant never finding this man, this love, this life. "What are you thinking?" Henry murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Alina smiled against his skin. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're brave enough to keep moving forward." Henry's arms tightened around her. "You're the bravest person I know, Alina Blackwood." The name still gave her a small thrill. Blackwood, not Blackwell. A name she had chosen rather than one that had been imposed upon her. A name she shared with the man who had climbed to an attic and changed the course of her life with his steady compassion and unwavering support. William's soft cry from the other room interrupted the moment, but neither minded. This was their life now, love interwoven with responsibility, passion balanced with parenthood. "I'll get him," Henry offered, pressing a kiss to Alina's forehead before rising to tend to their son. Alina watched him go, her heart full. The future stretched before them now, unmarked by fear, a path they would walk together, with William and perhaps other children beside them. There would be challenges, of course, as there were in any life. But they would face them together, strengthened by what they had already overcome. From victim to survivor to beloved wife and mother, Alina's transformation felt complete. The woman who had been locked in an attic, desperate and alone, was gone. In her place stood Alina Blackwood, who knew her own strength and worth, who had found not just safety but joy in the arms of a good man who saw her exactly as she was and loved her completely. As Henry returned with William, the baby's cries already soothed by his father's gentle handling, Alina made room for them both beside her. This was her family, chosen and cherished, built on a foundation of respect and love that Victor had never understood and could never destroy. "Welcome home, little one," she whispered as Henry settled beside her, William nestled between them. "Welcome home." In the years that followed, the Blackwood story became one of the many quiet legends of the Oregon frontier, not because of dramatic rescues or daring escapes, though those elements were certainly part of their beginning, but because of the life they built afterward. Alina thrived in the logging community, eventually establishing a small school for the children of the workers. Henry became a partner in his cousin's business, his steady leadership helping to expand their operations while maintaining fair treatment of the men under their employ. William grew into a strong boy with his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's sense of justice. He was joined in time by siblings, a sister, Sarah, born on a snowy December night in 1871, and twin brothers, Thomas and Michael, who arrived with surprising speed during the summer of 1874, keeping Dr. Peterson on his toes and filling the now expanded Blackwood cabin with twice the expected noise and joy. Beth and James visited from California when the twins were baptized, bringing their own children to meet their cousins. The Circle B Ranch had prospered in their absence, and though the friends didn't see each other often, the bonds formed during those crucial days in Placerville remained unbreakable. Victor Blackwell was eventually apprehended in Mexico and returned to face charges in California. The news reached the Blackwoods as a small paragraph in a Portland newspaper, noteworthy only for the closure it brought to a chapter of their lives long since turned. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Henry had heard Alina's voice in the attic and climbed the servants' stairs to find her. They stood together on the porch of their home, no longer a small cabin, but a proper house built with Henry's own hands to accommodate their growing family. The logging camp had evolved into a small town with a proper church, school, and store. The Blackwoods were respected members of the community, their history known to some but overshadowed by the life they had created together. You ever think about how differently things might have turned out? Alina asked as they watched their children playing in the yard, William, now a responsible 11-year-old, supervising his younger siblings with careful attention. Henry's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes. But then I look at them and at you, and I can't imagine any other path that would have led us here." Alina leaned into his embrace, still grateful after all these years for the steadiness of his love, the safety she had found in his arms. "Nor can I," she agreed softly. From desperate voices in an attic to joyful shouts in a sunlit yard, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. Two souls finding each other against all odds, creating a family and a legacy of love that would endure long beyond their own lifetimes. As the sun set behind the tall trees that had sheltered their life together, Alina turned in Henry's arms to kiss him, still with the wonder of that first time, but deepened now by years of shared joy and challenges overcome together. "I love you, Henry Blackwood," she whispered against his lips. His smile, warm and certain as it had been from the beginning, was the answer she had always needed. "And I love you, Eleanor Blackwood. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Their tomorrows stretched before them, rich with possibility and secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful day in Placerville together, with courage and unwavering love.